She was the most sought-after geisha in Kyoto. Powerful men paid fortunes just to be in her presence. But every night, when the lanterns went out, Sayuri wept for a man she could never have. A man without money, without power, without a future, but who possessed the one thing her millionaire Dana could never buy, her heart. This is the true story of Japan's most forbidden love. Kyoto, 1932. The world of geishas was governed by a brutal rule: you don't choose who you love. You love who buys you. The Dana, the wealthy patron who financed your life, wasn't a husband, wasn't a boyfriend. He was an owner. And Sayuri had the most powerful Dana in Gion, an industrialist who could destroy careers with a whisper. But at a spring festival, under the cherry blossoms, she met Kenji, a poor carpenter who built theater stages. A man invisible to the world, but impossible to ignore for her. What happens when your heart belongs to one man, but your destiny belongs to another? This is the story the geishas whispered in secret, the tragedy no one dared tell aloud. Prepare yourself. This story will break your heart. The meeting under the cherry trees. Spring 1932. Kyoto's cherry blossoms burst into bloom as if the sky had poured pink snow over the city. Hanami, the sacred flower festival, transformed Gion into a living dream. Paper lanterns swayed in the breeze. Shamisen music echoed through the narrow alleyways. And Sayuri, only 19 years old, walked among her geisha sisters like an apparition. Turquoise blue silk kimono embroidered with golden birds. Blood-red obi tied at the back like folded wings. Impeccable white makeup. She was walking art. But inside, she felt empty. Because beauty without purpose is just decoration. And she was tired of being admired by men who would never truly see her. That's when she saw him. Kenji. An ordinary man in a sea of forgettable faces, but something about him made her stop. He was assembling a wooden stage for the evening performances, muscles tense beneath his simple cotton shirt, sweat glistening on his brow, calloused hands moving heavy beams with the precision of a craftsman. There was nothing special about him, a poor carpenter, invisible to society, just another manual laborer. But when he looked up and met her eyes, the world vanished. It wasn't love at first sight. It was recognition. As if two souls who had searched for each other for 1,000 lifetimes had finally found each other in the most impossible place in the universe. Kenji froze, the wooden board in his hands. Sayuri stopped in the middle of the street, causing a traffic jam of geishas behind her. For 3 seconds, maybe 5, they simply existed in each other's gaze. There was no seductive smile. No calculated flirtation. It was something deeper and more frightening, total vulnerability. He saw through the makeup, beyond the kimono, straight to the weary girl pretending to be a legend. And she saw beyond the poverty, beyond the grime of manual labor, straight to the pure-souled man the world despised. In that instant, they both knew. They knew they had found exactly what they couldn't have. One of the older geishas tugged at Sayuri's arm, breaking her trance. "Come on, girl. We have appointments." And she was dragged back to the procession. But she turned her head one last time. Kenji was still there, standing, holding the wood as if he'd forgotten what he was doing. Cherry blossoms fell around him in slow motion. And Sayuri thought something that terrified her: I could love this man until I die. And he would destroy me without touching me. Because sometimes you recognize your soulmate and your greatest danger in the same person. And there's nothing more cruel than that. That night, Sayuri served tea to wealthy businessmen who laughed loudly and made vulgar jokes disguised as wit. She smiled at the right moments, laughed with the appropriate intensity, played the shamisen with perfect fingers. But her mind was under the cherry trees. It was in the calloused hands of a poor carpenter. It was in a glance that lasted seconds but changed everything. And for the first time in her career as a geisha, she understood the brutal difference between being seen and being recognized. 1,000 men had looked at her. Only one had seen her. And that man was exactly the one fate had forbidden. Because the universe, sometimes, has a cruel sense of humor. Dana's golden prison. Tanaka-san was the kind of man who commanded respect simply by entering a room. A powerful industrialist, owner of silk factories in 3 provinces, he was 52 years old and had a wife who pretended not to know of Sayuri's existence. He had chosen her 3 years earlier, when she was only 17, not on a whim, but after months of observing all the geishas of Gion. He paid a fortune to the Okiya. He bought kimonos that cost more than houses. And in return, Sayuri became his. Not legally, of course. Danas weren't husbands. They were patrons, protectors, owners disguised as generous men. And Tanaka-san was the most generous of them all. He never raised a hand to her. He never yelled. He never publicly humiliated her as other Danas did to their geishas. In fact, he was kind in his own distant and transactional way. He brought expensive gifts from his travels. He asked how her day had been, not because he truly cared, but because powerful men ask polite questions. He treated her like a valuable object deserving of care, not out of love for the object, but for the investment it represents. And Sayuri, trained since childhood to smile and give thanks, smiled and gave thanks. Because that's what geishas did. They existed to please. Never to be pleased. The brutal truth that no one said aloud was this: Tanaka-san never asked if Sayuri loved him. And she never offered to tell him. Because they both knew that love wasn't part of the deal. He paid for companionship, for beauty, for status. She delivered performance, elegance, the illusion of devotion. It was a silent contract, respected by both sides. But contracts, however fair they may seem on paper, don't warm cold hearts. And Sayuri's heart was freezing a little more with each night she spent by his side, smiling outwardly while dying inwardly. There were nights when Tanaka-san slept beside her, snoring contentedly after dinner at an exclusive tea house. And Sayuri would stay awake staring at the ceiling, counting the wooden beams, imagining what it would be like to wake up next to someone you truly loved. Someone whose touch didn't feel like a transaction. Someone who looked at you and saw a person, not property. She had everything money could buy: imported silks, rare jewels, a private room, financial security. But she lacked the only thing that truly mattered: choice. And without choice, all the luxury in the world was just a prettier cage. The cruelest thing of all was that Tanaka-san wasn't a monster. It would be easier if he were. It would be simpler to hate him, plan an escape, justify betrayal. But he was just a man living within the rules of a system they both accepted. He fulfilled his part. She fulfilled hers. And in this perfectly choreographed dance of mutual obligations, there was no room for something as inconvenient as true love. Sayuri understood now: you can have everything and have nothing at the same time. You can be safe and imprisoned, protected and suffocated. Because sometimes the cruelest prison doesn't have iron bars. It has golden bars. And it hurts exactly the same way. Secret meetings. The first secret meeting took place 2 weeks after that glance under the cherry blossoms. Sayuri left a tiny note with a flower vendor, just an address and a time, Kyanin Temple. 4 a.m. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. Kenji understood. That morning, while Gion slept soundly and even the lanterns seemed weary, she slipped out of the okiya like a shadow. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure she would wake the whole house. When she arrived at the abandoned temple at the back of the complex, Kenji was already there. Waiting. As if there were no other place in the world he would rather be. They didn't speak for several minutes. They just looked at each other, trying to believe it was real. That they had risked so much for 10 minutes of shared silence. Then Kenji extended his hand, just that, an open hand. And Sayuri, breaking every rule she had learned since childhood, placed hers inside. That simple touch was more intimate than anything she had ever experienced. More real than the nights with Tanaka-san. More real than years of performing as a geisha. Because for the first time, someone touched her asking, not demanding. And she chose to surrender, not out of obligation, but out of desire. Meetings became a routine of calculated risk. Always in the early hours of the morning. Always in places the world had forgotten, narrow alleys between old houses, deserted bridges over silent rivers, temple gardens where only ghosts wandered. Kenji waited for hours in the cold just to see her for 15 minutes. Sayuri lied to her geisha sisters, invented insomnia, feigned morning rituals. Each meeting was a theft, of time, of reality, of a future that didn't belong to them. But these were thefts that made them feel more alive than all the security and predictability of the next day. They never kissed. They never touched beyond intertwined hands and, sometimes, when courage allowed, faces close enough to feel each other's breath. But there was more intimacy in those near touches than in 1,000 nights of physical obligation. They spoke softly, whispering impossible dreams. Kenji talked about building a small house near the mountains. Sayuri described what it would be like to wake up without having to smile at anyone. They created parallel universes where they could simply be human, not geisha and carpenter, but Sayuri and Kenji. And for 10 minutes, that universe was real. But reality always returned. The sky began to lighten, and Sayuri needed to disappear before the world awoke. Every goodbye was agony. Every separation, a small death. Kenji held her hands until the last possible second, memorizing the warmth, the texture, the proof that she was real. Sayuri looked back 3, 4 times, until the darkness completely swallowed him. And then she returned to her golden cage, lay down beside Tanaka-san, and kept those stolen 10 minutes as a secret treasure. 10 minutes that were worth more than entire years. 10 minutes that proved, true love doesn't need time. It only needs truth. The impossible choice. It was on an autumn dawn, under an old bridge where the river murmured secrets, that Kenji finally uttered the words Sayuri both feared and longed for, "Run away with me." His voice trembled, but his eyes were steady, determined. He opened a small cloth bag and showed her everything he possessed in the world, coins saved for months, some crumpled bills, a scribbled map of a mountain village where no one would recognize them. "It won't be easy," he admitted, "we'll be poor, maybe we'll go hungry for a few days. But we'll be free. And we'll be together." Sayuri felt the world stop. What she had fantasized about for 1,000 sleepless nights was now there, real, tangible, waiting only for a yes. But the yes didn't come. It couldn't. Because Sayuri knew brutal truths that Kenji, in his loving innocence, refused to see. She owed the Okiya an unpayable fortune, years of training, clothes, food, accommodation. Everything recorded, everything charged, everything tied to her name like invisible chains. If she ran away, they wouldn't just be running for freedom. They would be running from powerful men who didn't tolerate disobedience. Tanaka-san wasn't just rich. He was connected. One word from him and Kenji would lose his entire job in Kyoto. 2 men sent and they would be found in any corner of Japan. Sayuri knew women who had tried to escape. Some were brought back in disgrace. Others were never seen again. She looked at those pathetic coins in Kenji's hand and felt love and despair at the same time. How could she explain that love doesn't pay debts? That passion doesn't fill stomachs? That freedom without money is just another form of prison, perhaps worse, because it comes with hunger, cold, and the guilt of dragging someone you love into misery? Kenji saw escape as romance. Sayuri saw it as a slow death sentence. He imagined a simple little house in the mountains. She saw a brutal winter without heating, illness without doctors, old age without dignity. He dreamed of freedom. She calculated survival. And that difference, between masculine dream and feminine calculation of risk, was the abyss that no love could cross. "I can't," she finally whispered, her voice breaking, tears she could no longer hold back streaming down her carefully applied makeup. Kenji went pale, as if she had stabbed him. "Why?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Don't you love me?" Sayuri cupped his face in both hands, a bold gesture she had never made before. "I love you more than my own life," she said, each word bleeding truth. "But loving you doesn't change reality. It doesn't erase my debt. It doesn't protect you from the vengeance of powerful men. It doesn't keep us alive when the money runs out." And there, on that bridge, Kenji understood for the first time, love doesn't conquer all. Sometimes, love loses. Brutally. There was a long, painful silence as they both processed what it meant. Sayuri expected him to beg, to argue, to promise the impossible. But Kenji only nodded slowly, his eyes red but without tears. "Then I will love you from wherever I am," he said in a hoarse voice. "Even if it's from afar. Even if it's in silence. Even if it destroys me." Sayuri wanted to scream that he deserved more. That he should find someone free, someone possible, someone who could truly be his. But she couldn't. Because the selfish truth was this, she wanted to be loved by him, even knowing she could never fully reciprocate. And in that moment, Sayuri understood, she wasn't a heroine from a romantic story. She was just a woman making impossible choices, surviving in the only way she knew how. And sometimes, survival is also courage. A farewell under the same cherry trees. Exactly 1 year after that first glance that changed everything, Sayuri sent Kenji a message of just 4 words, "Tomorrow. Cherry blossoms. Last time." He didn't question it. He didn't try to negotiate. He simply nodded that he would be there. That night, Sayuri didn't sleep. She spent hours choosing the perfect kimono, jade-colored silk embroidered with herons in flight, the most beautiful she owned. It wasn't vanity. It was intention. If that would be the last image Kenji would have of her, she wanted it to be unforgettable. Not the geisha forced to smile, but the woman who chose to love him even knowing she could never have him. She wanted him to remember her like that, beautiful, whole, and impossible. When she arrived under the cherry trees, the same ones where it all began, Kenji was already waiting. He wasn't wearing any special clothes. Just the same simple carpenter's clothes, clean but patched. And somehow, that honest simplicity broke her heart more than any luxury ever could. They stood there for long seconds, just looking at each other, memorizing faces as if they could keep that moment in jars and carry it with them forever. Cherry blossom petals fell around them like pink snow, nature witnessing what no human would ever know. And Sayuri, for the first time in a year of careful silences, spoke the whole truth aloud. "I love you," she said, her voice firm despite the tears streaming freely. "I love you in ways I can't even explain. I love you more than my own life. More than my safety. More than anything I've ever known." She took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would destroy them. "But I can't go with you. I can't run away. I can't be your wife. I can't give you a future. And carrying this truth kills me a little every day." Kenji closed his eyes for a moment, processing words he already knew but that were now real, definitive, inescapable. When he opened them again, there was acceptance in them. Pain, yes. But also understanding. He didn't beg. He didn't try to argue or change her mind. Because throughout that year of secret meetings, he had learned who Sayuri really was, not a weak woman who gave in easily, but someone making brutal choices to survive in a world that never gave her real options. So he simply held her hands, for the last time, and said in a calm but broken voice, "Then I will love you from afar. Forever. I will love you in silence. I will carry you in my heart until my last day." And in those simple words there was more commitment than 1,000 wedding vows. Because he was choosing to love her without reward, without a future, without hope. Love for love's sake. Nothing more. They stood there, hands intertwined beneath the cherry blossoms, as the world slowly awakened around them. There was no farewell kiss. No final embrace. Just those hands holding each other tightly, knowing they are about to let go forever. When the sky began to clear more than was safe, Sayuri let go first. She took 3 steps back, her eyes fixed on him, memorizing every detail. Then she turned and walked away without looking back, not out of coldness, but because she knew that if she looked, she wouldn't have the strength to continue. Kenji stayed under the cherry blossoms until she disappeared completely, petals falling around him like nature's tears. And when he finally left, he left behind not just a love, but the version of himself that believed love was enough. Sometimes it isn't. And that is the cruelest truth of all. The legacy of impossible love. Sayuri continued as a geisha for another 20 years after that farewell under the cherry blossoms. Her career flourished. She became one of the most sought-after geishas in Gion, known not only for her beauty but for her mysterious presence, something in her eyes that suggested depths no one could ever reach. When Tanaka-san became a widower 7 years later, he made Sayuri the proposal every geisha supposedly dreamed of: a legal marriage, lifelong security, social respect. She accepted. Not because I loved him, but because at 32, a geisha without a dana and without a husband faced a bleak future. It was a marriage of convenience disguised as a happy ending. And Sayuri played the role of devoted wife with the same perfection with which she played the role of geisha. But it was always just that, a role. Kenji never married. Friends tried to introduce him to kind, hardworking, available women. He politely refused, without explanation. He continued working as a carpenter, building stages for theaters, bridges for temples, always working with wood as if conversing with something sacred. He died at 60 from pneumonia, alone in a small house on the outskirts of Kyoto. When they cleaned out his belongings, they found very few things: carpentry tools, simple clothes, basic furniture. But hidden in a handcrafted wooden box was a single faded photograph, Sayuri under the cherry blossoms, secretly taken during that spring festival years ago. The photo was so faded that the edges had disappeared. As if he looked at it every night before going to sleep. Decades passed. Japan changed. The world of geishas shrank, transformed, modernized. Sayuri aged with dignity, white hair tied in a traditional bun, back still straight, hands still elegant even wrinkled. Tanaka-san eventually died, leaving her a wealthy and respected widow. She had everything: her own house, substantial savings, an impeccable reputation. Neighbors envied her. Other retired geishas admired her. But there were nights when she woke up in her empty bed and felt a void that no amount of money could fill. A space reserved for someone who never slept there. A ghost of a carpenter she loved for perhaps 6 months of secret meetings, but who occupied her heart for 60 years. It was to a young apprentice, decades later, that Sayuri finally confessed. The girl had naively asked, "Grandma, were you happy in your life?" Sayuri remained silent for so long that the girl thought she wouldn't answer. Then, looking at the cherry blossoms in the garden, "Always the cherry blossoms," the old geisha said, "I had everything in life. A beautiful house. A brilliant career. A rich husband. Complete security. Everyone's respect." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was broken in a way that no makeup could hide, "But I never had the one man who truly mattered. And that makes everything emptier than you can imagine." The apprentice didn't fully understand at that moment. But she kept those words. And years later, when faced with her own impossible choice, she remembered and understood. Sayuri died at 83, in her sleep, surrounded by material comfort but emotionally alone. Important people attended the funeral: former clients, other geishas, distant relatives of Tanaka-san. It was a respectable, appropriate ceremony. But when they cremated her body and cleaned her belongings, they found something no one expected. Hidden at the bottom of a secret drawer, wrapped in old silk, was a cheap cotton handkerchief crudely embroidered with the initials KT, Kenji Tanaka. She had kept it for over 50 years. Loved, protected, hidden. Proof that you can live 60 years with the wrong person and still belong to the one you had for 6 months. Some loves are not meant to be lived. They are meant to be carried, honored, kept as sacred relics. And perhaps that is enough. Or perhaps it is the most beautiful tragedy that exists. Sayuri never discovered the answer. She only lived with the question. Until the end. If this story touched you deeply, leave a comment. Would you choose impossible love or guaranteed security? There is no right answer. Only your truth. Subscribe for more true stories of forbidden love, silent sacrifices, and the hidden life of geishas. The next story might be even more devastating. See you there.